Was this barn your retirement project?
Kinda. Yeah, I'll tell you how it all started. It all started so I could have a place to play music without bothering everybody. Because I can't turn it up in the house, and I don't like playing quiet. It don't have to be loud, but I gotta hear it, you know? Gotta feel it a little bit.
Check 1, 2.
So that's it. All right, dadgummit. Let's see.
We're in Knoxville, a city in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains in eastern Tennessee. It's early June and inching towards that temperature where moving around outside feels like a challenge. It's especially hot inside the barn that Scott Payne built. And calling it a barn doesn't do it justice. It's a man cave, really. Or as Scott calls it, the barn dominium.
Yeah, so barn dominium, it's 30 by 24 or 26. And then it's, I think it's 18-foot walls and the open ceiling. We got a little loft up top that's about 10 foot deep. But it's my office, it's a bar, it's a place to hang out.
In one corner, drenched in sun, there's a high stool and amps for when he's playing his guitars. When he isn't, he hangs them up like championship pennants next to an American flag the size of a bedsheet. At the back is a shelving unit that takes up almost the whole wall. It's adorned with memorabilia from his Undercover cases, rows of trophies and plaques, medals, framed certificates, and photos.
This is kind of what started of the hooray for me wall, I guess. Of course, the bass case. That's the balaclava. That's what you get, and you get the patch when you get into the bass. Of course, that's Georgia, the cell I was in. So I got all my little pins here. White Pride Worldwide. There's your lightning bolts, the SS, KKK, more White Pride. That is the original Aryan Nation group, the Klan, and stuff like that.
There's a whole shelf devoted to the Klan. There's even a copy of the official KKK handbook with a chapter called Klanversations.
But man, I had to study this, and we had Klan craft class every Wednesday night. This is the mystic insignia of the Klansman. This goes back. There's a lot of history. And if you look at the seal, it's actually 4Ks. The original seal had 4Ks. But yeah, they would quiz you.
When he retired and gave that interview to Rolling Stone magazine, he started to get known as a type of Hillbilly Donnie Brasco, and he didn't mind at all. Scott says the number one rule of being a good undercover is to be yourself, or at the very least, know who you are, where you came from, and how to fit in. So, who is Scott Payne? Where did he come from? And how does he fit in? I'm Michelle Shephard, and from CBC, this is Agent Palehorse, Episode 2, You Got Anything for Rednecks?
I grew up in a Christian family, Christian home. I had to work for what I got. My parents wouldn't just give me stuff, but I was an only child, which probably explains a lot, some people say.
What do those people say?
Yeah, I don't know. You never had to share nothing? I don't know.
Scott was born and raised in Greenville, South Carolina, home of Shoeless Joe Jackson, beautiful parks, and Southern charm.
My mom was the brains, right? She had I think she just had an associate's at that point, but she was like a paralegal and all kinds of stuff. She did all the books. My dad had developed his own landscaping company, and even though he dropped out in the 10th grade, very street smart, hard worker, and great morals and values, wise on that spectrum. And he, at that time in South Carolina, had the third largest landscaping company. I remember when it was at its prime, we had a retail store, and he probably had like 2 or 3 crews out working. And then the older I got, the more I had to do. Some people think, oh, you're spoiled because it's your dad's company. Listen, he would leave, and I'm out there on a construction site with a bunch of grown men pouring whiskey in their coffee in the morning and smoking filterless cigarettes. I figured at a very early age, I had to outwork them. So that way there wouldn't be any, oh, you're daddy's little boy kind of thing out here. And I would. They'd be taking a cigarette break and I'm like, come on, that's enough. Let's go. Let's work.
It was the 80s. You know, when movies like The Breakfast Club came out, and high schools tended to have well-defined social groups.
I could flow around. I mean, I've always been a people person.
What was it like? Like, did you hang out with the jocks? Did you have a certain clique?
That's the Canadian, huh? Clique? Is that how you guys say it up there?
You don't say clique?
It's a clique here. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, but that's fine. I mean, that's cool. Clique. I'll probably say it that way from now on. Actually, I could hang out with anybody. We had a smoking area in high school. I could go down there and hang out. I mean, I wasn't like a smoker, but my pack might last me a week and a half, you know? But I could go in there and hang out. The stoners, weed, I could hang out with those people. I was a jock, weightlifting, playing ball, and I was a musician and a singer. So kind of jack of all trades, master of none. At one point, I even made it in the Beta Club because I had good grades.
The Beta Club is for high academic achievers. Its motto is developing the leaders of tomorrow. But the stereotype of what a Beta Club kid looks like wasn't exactly Scott.
I had the traditional 80s mullet, but not the shaved on the side, shaved on the top, you know, party in the back mullet, but just full hair, you know, like some Farrah Fawcett bangs. I showed you a picture.
I've seen the pictures.
You know, yeah.
I know you like that look, but it is god-awful.
Ah, come on. I was rocking that. I was rocking it.
I grew up in the 80s too. Big eyebrows and shoulder pads. It really wasn't a good-looking decade. And Scott, he didn't just have a mullet. He also wore sleeveless shirts, fingerless weightlifting gloves, and a spiked leather bracelet. He was a big kid with an attitude to match. But it was back in high school that Scott first got a taste of undercover work. And it all began at the Greenville East Side High School Talent Show, where Scott and his band played Van Halen's Hot for Teacher.
The chorus is, I got it bad, I got it bad, I got it bad. I'm hot for teacher. Well, it turns out, as a young man in the 80s who had only really had stage experience at keg parties, grabbing your crotch, saying something like that at the same time was, you know, something to do to get the crowd into it. And I really didn't realize, because I was inexperienced, how many times I was grabbing my crotch at the talent show. And this isn't a keg party. This is families coming to see their kids do karate moves, or families coming to see their kids play the violin. And here we are as a rock band, and I'm grabbing my crotch in front of everybody. And we probably got to the second verse before they realized what was going on, and they started literally closing the curtain on us and pulling the power.
Show's over. The weekend goes by, and it's Monday morning. Scott gets called down to Mr. Walker's office.
Mr. Walker was the vice principal. Lloyd Walker. Shorter black guy. He just didn't like me. Maybe I was a smart aleck, I don't know. Maybe it was my look, maybe it was who I was hanging with. And he called me into his office, and I'm like, man, I didn't grab myself that much. And we actually had a tape on VCR, so he played it for me.
Mr. Walker grabs the big clunky VHS recording of Friday night's talent show, and they watch.
I probably grab my crotch every, 30 seconds, who knows. So he starts laying into me, and I'm like, whoa. And we start talking about different cultures, and, like even Michael Jackson grabs himself on stage, and we start laughing, and next thing you know, we're giggling and cutting up. And that's the first time that ever happened. And then probably junior year in high school or senior year, word spread that somebody had basically done malicious damage to Mr. Walker's home. But they not only did they roll the trees with toilet paper, they spray painted his car. He had a BMW, I think. Spray painted it, keyed it, spray painted the house. There were some bad words on there. Some of them were, N-words, something like that. And he called me into his office. And I thought, well, what did I do? And he calls me in, and he asked me if I'd be willing to help him try to figure out who did that to his house. So I started working the circles of people, and I think it was in the gym one day. And, just nonchalant. Hey, man, did you hear what happened to Mr. Walker? Yeah, man, that's messed up, blah, 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 blah. Or, hey, man, screw him. He deserves it kind of thing.
Scott's working his cliques/clicks, doing what he does best, blending in, chatting, being a people person.
There was one guy who anytime the conversation would start, he'd just break eye contact. And then I started doing some research and bouncing it off of Mr. Walker, and it turns out that he did get in trouble with Mr. Walker. And I don't think they ever pinned it on him, but it was him. Because I told Mr. Walker that, not being a rat, I'm not a rat or whatever. But, it was the right thing to do. That's the real reason. I mean, you do it because it's the right thing to do. I guess that's probably my first undercover experience that I can think of, I mean, I'm not pretending to be somebody else, but I am kind of covertly going into groups and trying to find out information.
But the Mr. Walker investigation didn't set him on the path of becoming one of the FBI's most storied undercovers right away. Scott had a lot going on at home. He watched his father struggle with depression, and after a year of constant fighting, his parents filed for divorce. Even though he was raised in a devout Christian family, Scott didn't turn to God for comfort.
I went into a pretty dark area. I would listen to basically devil-worshiping type music. I had a friend introduce me into like the witchcraft, black magic, Satanism kind of stuff, and I'm not proud of it at all. But any animal that was in my yard that wasn't my dog, I shot and killed. And I was just mean, but I was hurting and I was doing stupid stuff. And
Scott said he would spend hours watching horror movies. He'd imitate the creepy voices of the characters to try to scare people, and he did. But he says there was one night when he took this shtick too far.
We were at a party, just drinking. No, nothing else. No drugs, no psychedelics, no nothing. It was just drinking. And I remember looking, and all I saw was like a watery image looking at me. And there was a demon looking at me and laughing as I was laughing and pointing at me and like giving me the finger to come here. Long fingernails. I screamed because it scared the living crap out of me. Scared the Jesus back into me. I was as white as a ghost. I was panting heavy. I was pouring sweat. I don't know how many miles it was, but I walked from that house. That was a Saturday night. I didn't sleep, and I walked to Edwards Road Baptist Church and I think I sat through 2 sermons. And that was it. I was done with the devil worshiping.
Scott cemented his faith that day. Shortly after, he went off to college, and he decided to study psychology, in part because he wanted to understand his dad's depression.
One day I hit a criminal justice course, and I was like, man, I'm really, really fascinated by this. But when I hit those classes originally for the criminal justice, I thought, hey, I'll be a lawyer. It didn't take me long to figure out I'd probably be a terrible lawyer. But then I started looking into law enforcement, and by this time, you got to realize I'd already, at that point in my life, I already realized I was a bully of bullies. Now, that doesn't mean I'm tough. It doesn't mean I'm better than anybody else. But what it does mean is I always take up for the little guy.
So Scott finished up his psychology degree as he began exploring options in law enforcement. But he was also acquiring some valuable schooling at the time that didn't come from higher education. He was about to learn a lot inside a bar called Desperados.
It was an event center / bar.
Joe Ferris is one of Scott's closest friends. They both played football in college, and they were roommates. Scott was paying for his tuition by bouncing at a country bar named Desperados. Joe worked there with him.
And, of course, anytime you're at a place like that and, there's people consuming alcohol, there's going to be fights and that you got to break up. You got to fight people to get them outside the bar, to get them usually into the custody of Charleston County Sheriff's Office, because usually the manager or somebody would call the Sheriff's Office when you had a big fight or something.
And I think, obviously to be a bouncer, you need to have physical strength, but what other kind of skills do you need to have? And in particular, what kind of skills did Scott have when he was working there?
One of the big skills, just being able to talk to somebody, being able to convince, especially in bouncing, convince someone that is drunk to maybe do something they don't want to do, like leave the club or, leave this person alone or whatever it is, just, where you don't have to just go up and fight every time. So just being able to talk to somebody is huge.
Scott says that's how he learned what he likes to call his verbal judo.
So if you've only got 2 bouncers for a whole bar and there's 2 to 3 parties of bachelor parties and they got 10 to 15 people in each, what are you going to do if they all break bad? You got to start learning how to talk. You got to start learning how to be a people person, at least in my mind. And that's what I did.
When he graduated from college, it took a while to get a policing job, so he kept bouncing. His first chance at law enforcement came in 1993 when he started working for the Greenville County Sheriff's Office, where that ability to talk served him well.
I remember my first beat area. It went all the way up to the state line in North Carolina. So it was a mountainous region. So it's not like super busy with calls, but it was a great place to kind of learn, You'd show up out there and no backup. Your backup's probably 40 plus minutes away. And you show up and there's a dude standing there with a shotgun and, somebody's shot. And you're like, there's a dead person laying there and you're like, well, how are things going today? Okay, good. I'm Officer Payne, with the sheriff's office. Got a call on disturbance. I'm up here. Tell me what happened. Well, that's, he came in here and then I shot him. All right, cool. Can you give me a statement? It was already done before you got there.
From beat cop, Scott moved to vice and narcotics. This was the early 90s, 2 decades into the war on drugs.
All of us agree that the gravest domestic threat facing our nation today is drugs. Our courts, our prisons, our legal system are stretched to the breaking point. In short, drugs are sapping our strength as a nation.
As President George H.W. Bush promised victory, Forbes magazine named Pablo Escobar the 7th richest man in the world. On some nights, Scott's assignment would be to pose as a buyer looking for a fix.
We pull up to one of these streets that's in a rough neighborhood, high drug trafficking area. And they're like, hey, man, we'll just roll down there. We got the camera already set up. We're just going to roll you through. You got $20. You're going to buy a rock, a crack rock. I'm like, I don't know, 280 pounds. I do not look like I smoke crack, right? Unless I just started. So I pull down the street and I roll up to the corner and man, they're coming up and they're like, what you want? And I'm like, I roll down the window and I'm like, give me a 20. And I slide the $20 through the window like it's, like like I'm putting something into the ATM or something, or a vending machine. And the guy gives me, a sliver of a rock. It was probably soap for all I know. Who knows? But I was so scared. I was freaking out, man. I was like, but that's how you start learning.
Scott knew right away that's what he wanted to do. He was not going to stop until he became an undercover agent.
I'm an adrenaline junkie. It's not like I'm jumping out of planes or jumping off of buildings, but you're an adrenaline junkie. And man, that was cool. You get that, oh man, this is awesome.
But there were only so many opportunities that came through the local sheriff's office.
Really, how deep are you going to go deep undercover in your county if you've already been a cop, or if when you bust people as a narcotics officer, you have to go to court and testify? There's only so many ways you can shave your facial hair and grow your hair and change your clothes and change out vehicles before they just know.
But during one of his shifts, he was passing the hours with this sergeant who he idolized.
He looked like a bulldog. He's a former Marine, Popeye forearms with a tattoo, I'm pretty sure, of a bulldog on his forearm. If it wasn't a bulldog, it was the Marine, Semper Fi and Anchor. But he might have had both, I don't know. But he looked like a bulldog. We were on surveillance, and I was sitting with him. And at that point, my nickname was Kingpin.
You're going to learn that Scott has a lot of nicknames. I'm not sure I've met anybody with as many as he says he has.
He said, Kingpin, he said, if I was a young guy like you, and I was single, and I had a college degree, he said, I'd apply with the FBI. And I looked at him and I said, what are you crazy? What are you smoking? I'm like, that's ridiculous. I said, I thought the FBI just did bank robberies. He said, no, son, they do everything.
So he applies, and he gets in. With his basset hound in tow, Scott packs up his 4x4 truck and heads to the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. Weeks into the program, all the agents in training are assigned a stressful task. List the FBI offices where you'd like to work in order of preference, all 56 of them.
You're laying in bed and you're sweating going, wait a minute, if I put Denver first, but then I start in the Southeast, they may send me to Honolulu. I'd like to go to Honolulu. I've never been, but man, that's a long way from, you know what I mean? You start doing all this stuff. And I basically started in the Southeast and just worked my way all the way around. So you go up there and stand in front of everybody on orders night, and you walk up and they got the map of the United States and they start putting pins where everybody's going. Well, out of like 52 people in my class, man, I didn't get called to like the last 5 or 10 people. So I saw some people get New Orleans, and I go, man, I had that high on my list. I saw Philly, and I go, well, that's closer than, and I'm seeing some other things. So when I stood up, I said, I'm Scott Payne. I'm from Greenville, South Carolina. I said, my number 1 pick was Denver. And I said, what do I think I'm going to get? Well, it's not looking too good for the Southern guys. And I opened it up, and it was New York City. And I said, New York City. I said, and my nickname was Big Country. I said, big country going to the Big Apple.
Well, I thought it was hilarious. I was like, Scott will never fit in there.
That's Scott's college buddy, Joe Ferris again.
He is just country. Is all get out. There's no way he's going to make it there.
But Scott has a knack for fitting in, even when he doesn't. So, on the 22nd floor of the FBI building in Manhattan, he finds a home with the Colombian Drug Squad unit. It was a busy beat, yet he can't stop thinking about doing undercover work.
I knew I wanted to be an undercover from my cop days. And when I got in the FBI, I was like, oh, this is what they do.
But to become an undercover agent with the FBI, you have to pass a rigorous certification program at their undercover school. It's not something you can just sign up for. And it would take him another 4 years until he even got an invitation to attend the program.
So it's extremely competitive to get into the FBI undercover program. When I joined, my wife and I joined, the FBI took 3 out of every 100 applicants.
Terry Rancorn spent 21 years in the FBI, and he and his wife retired shortly before Scott in 2019.
So just getting in the door, you're seeing Harvard law graduates being turned away. You're seeing people who were former Navy SEALs being turned away. So you get this feeling, it's like, wow, I'm really in the top cut here. Okay. It's like I made the NFL draft or the NBA draft.
Like Scott, he was an undercover agent, and he was also an instructor at the FBI's exclusive undercover school.
It's such a difficult course. I mean, you are surviving on, I think the average is about 3 hours of sleep per night for 2 weeks. And you're thrown into these scenarios where you have to think on your feet and you have to improvise. And if you screw up, it doesn't go well for you. They're very violent scenarios. You may be doing an arms deal in a hotel room and you screw up and say the wrong thing, or you forget part of your legend.
Legend. That's FBI speak for your backstory, your undercover persona.
And all of a sudden, you're just pummeled by these big geezers that grab you and drag you into the bathroom and are literally pushing your head under the water in a bathtub.
Oh, wow. These are the instructors they're doing. It sounds a little bit like hazing.
Oh, and we've been accused of that. It's not hazing. It's not done like, okay, this is going to happen to you. It's all done to teach lessons to keep you from dying in the real world. We've had students have teeth knocked out. We've had several students have nervous breakdowns during the school, literal nervous breakdowns. We've never killed anyone yet, but we've had people medevaced out by helicopter. Scott was actually one of my students.
What were your impressions when you met him?
Very impressed. I remember seeing him perform, and he had great composure. He's a big guy, so he could pull off being intimidating, but he's very charismatic. And he was able to think ahead on the chessboard rather than just react. So a lot of the common misconception about undercovers is that they're used car salesmen, they're slick talkers. And that's really not the case. They're strategists. They're playing a game of chess. And you have to understand the consequences of pushing your queen out to the middle of the board. Okay, what's that going to do for you? What advantages, what disadvantages? But Scott had the ability to use his size in conjunction with humor and strategic thinking to really navigate some really, really complex scenarios and do just a fantastic job.
And Scott loved every minute of it.
When I went through the school, I mean, I would be, honestly, I was the last one to leave. And they were like, kid, go to bed. And I'm like, I'll get the trash. I mean, I was eating it up. I wanted as much knowledge as I could.
After graduating, Scott goes back to his day job. He gets a transfer to another FBI division near the Mexican border in San Antonio, Texas. He's back doing narcotics investigations, human smuggling operations, and he's happy. But he is getting impatient. He really wants an undercover case.
Well, I was looking for anything. You know, on paper, I didn't really jump out a lot. I'm a white guy with no foreign language. Southern, former cop. So what was my backstory? Well, I'm a landscaper. Well, how many cases can you do? It's not going to carry you far, you know what I mean? So, you know, I got out and I started calling about every 2 weeks. That's always been my MO. Even when I was trying to get a job, even in high school, I'd call every 2 weeks. And eventually they just hire you because you're persistent, is what I found. But I would call the person over my region at headquarters, a supervisor in the undercover unit. And I'd say, hey, Scott, hey, what's going on, country? Hey, you got anything for any white guys with no foreign language? They'd be like, oh, man, we got a 2 weeks later. Hey, you got anything for any rednecks?
He doesn't get a bite, but he is asked to come back to the undercover school as a role player to get more experience.
One night I might be a banker on a scenario. The next night I might be a biker. The next night I might be dressed in a suit at, you know, something. And you roll with it. But I started getting recruited out of there. Some of my mentors, they'd be like, hey, man, would you be interested in coming to Atlanta? I didn't just come up here to role play. I came up here to kind of look for somebody and recruit. I'm like, absolutely. And that's how I started getting noticed.
And finally, he gets a chance. It's for a massive biker investigation, and there's nothing Scott would love more. He seems perfect for the role. But first, he has to audition, so he flies to Boston.
I sat in one chair, and there's DEA, FBI, ATF, all the local agencies, task force officers, and they're just peppering me with questions. Well, how many undercovers have you done? How many biker gangs have you infiltrated? None. Well, what makes you think you'd be good? Because I'm a biker. I know the undercover technique. I bounced at places where the Hells Angels frequented. They have helped me in many fights. I've done this, you know.
He thinks the audition went okay, but he's not the only candidate, and he's pretty green when it comes to undercover work. But then, by coincidence, he's in Oklahoma on a case, and one of his mentors is there.
And he's like, hey, country, come here. I said, yes, sir. I walked in the back. He said, I just got off the phone with Mike, the undercover coordinator. And I said, oh, well, that's funny that I'm actually here when he called. And he said, yeah. He said, he just questioned me about you. And I said, okay. And he said, he wanted to know if I would vouch for you. And he said, yeah, I think he's a good kid, this, that, and the other. And he said, and then he pinned me in a corner. And he said, would you use him on your undercover? He said, I told him, yes, I would. And he looked at me, he said, so I just vouched for you. So don't fuck this up. And I said, no pressure.
Scott gets the gig. His targets? Members of the Outlaws, one of America's most violent biker gangs and historic arch rivals of the Hells Angels. They're notoriously insular and almost impossible to infiltrate. When you got that and you were like, this is my dream, this is what I always wanted to do, this is why I got into it, did you have any idea what you were in for?
No. Compared to what happened, no.
That's coming up on the next episode of Agent Palehorse. This series was written and produced by me, Michelle Shephard, senior producer Ashley Mack, and producer Eunice Kim. Mixing and sound design by Evan Kelly. Emily Cannell is our digital producer. Our intern was Rachel DeGasperis. Special thanks to Andrew Friesen, Graham McDonald, the CBC Reference Library, and Oralation Studios. Chris Oak and Cecil Fernandez are our executive producers. Tanya Springer is the senior manager, and RF Noorani is the director of CBC Podcasts. This series was written and produced alongside a book I wrote with Scott, codename Palehorse, How I Went Undercover to Expose America's Nazis. You can catch up with Season 1 of White Hot Hate wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're enjoying this series and want to help new listeners discover the show, please take some time to give us a rating and review on whichever is your chosen app. It really helps.